Hello and welcome to another build video. This time we can finally put all the sub-assemblies we previously built together. So let's get to it. Before we forget, we're gonna install the rear toe links. Again, as for the steering links, I want to make sure the little hole for adjusting the length faces to the right of the car. Just to make sure I never get confused when adjusting the toe-in. And then we can move on to the dampers. So note the orientation. The rear ones are the ones with slightly bigger spring gap in our case. These go to the rear, these go to the front, and we can secure them onto the chassis using the ST112 screws, the same as for the bulkheads. They are the machine screw with the little shoulder on them. So we are not going fully tight yet. We want to let them wiggle a bit for now. And we're gonna wait for the lower arms to be installed before fully securing them to the chassis. So again, make sure they can wiggle a little bit for now. We're gonna go fully tight later on. Then let's grab the lower arms. Again, note the orientation. The longer Ackerman plates go at the front of the car. So we're gonna first insert the shock rod into the spring, slide the whole thing inwards, and secure the lower arms using the PO7 clips. All right, and now we can tighten up the dampers, and what we want to achieve is to line up the ST102 shock lever to the ST205 damper rod. So what we're gonna do is from the bottom or from the top, but find an angle where you can line them up and go finger tight first, and then while holding firmly the damper in place, go fully tight. And now we can see the lever is fully lined up with the bearing for the most precise action possible. So check for free movement. All good, and we can move on to secure all four dampers in the same way. All right, perfect. And then finally, we can install the C45 stiffeners. So in your kit, you will get two of these, one for the front, one for the rear. But in all the team setup, most of them we only use the rear one, sometimes even no stiffeners at all. So in this setup, we're gonna only install the rear one, and the way to identify it, it is slightly longer, as you can see from the top. And we're gonna secure it with two 5mm button head screws. So we're gonna insert it through the belts and onto the top of the dampers. Again, we're gonna go finger tight first. Let it find its place. And then we go fully tight. Moving on, we can install the sway bars. So in this setup, we're gonna go 1.2 front. There's 2 notches here, 1.1 in the rear. And first we're gonna check that the sway bars are as flat as possible. So to do so, just lay it flat on the board and check that both ends lift the same amount, or actually touches the board the same amount. And we can see that on this one, the left side has a little bit of play here. So we're just gonna go and bend slightly by hand the sway bar until it lays perfectly flat on the table. Just give it a twisting motion like so. Perfect. This one needs a bit of twisting in the other direction. And since we don't have any turnbuckle in the car to adjust the sway bar tension, that's the only way to achieve symmetrical sway bar action. So don't overlook this. Perfect. So leave this one aside. We're gonna install the rear. So grab 2 of these little collets, 2 bearings. You're gonna install the grab screws already now. So these mount from the inside of the sway bar holders. So we're gonna watch for the sway bar kink. This goes to the bottom. You're gonna first finger tight 1 collet around roughly 3-4 mil from the sway bar kink, and the other one we're gonna leave it hanging for now. And this is a bit finicky at first, but the way I do it, so you go through the belt, through the first sway bar holder, through the first PO5, then the other sway bar holder, the other PO5, and then we can secure the second collet. But we're not done yet. We want to actually make sure the sway bar is perfectly centered onto the car. So to achieve that, we want to look at the angle of the 2 PO5 and shift the sway bar left or right accordingly. So in our case, this looks like the sway bar is a little bit too much to the left, so we're gonna shift it a bit to the right. So we loosen up this collet a little bit, shift the sway bar, we secure it, and check again. A bit better, but still a bit too much to the left. All right, this seems good enough to me. We can repeat the operation at the front. So again, through the belt, through the first sway bar holder, through the other one, other PO5 and secure the second collet. This time we're gonna shift it slightly to the left. That seems about right to me. Next step, we can install spool and diff. So for this setup, we're gonna allow for low position. So that means the little dots will be at the top. So not the orientation. At the front, the pulley goes to the right. And at this stage, we also want to set belt tension. So we're gonna go on neutral first and check for it. Neutral is usually perfectly fine for modified because you need quite a bit of tension. But for stock racing, you want to go a little bit more loose than that, maybe 1 notch or 2. But crucially, we want to achieve exactly the same tension front to rear. And if needed, I would even recommend going half notches sometimes, like moving the eccentric only one side and not the other, to achieve as close as possible even belt tension. And if anything, it's better, it's more okay to have more tension at the front than the rear, never the opposite. More rear tension than front will create some really bad handling issues. So absolutely make sure that your belt tension is the same front and rear. But in our case, middle neutral tension seems about right for the front and the rear. These belts are obviously new. Once they break in, they tend to relax a little bit and tension might need to be adjusted. So we're gonna secure everything with the AM19Rs. Check the orientation. There is a little bit of a recess at the bottom to give a bit more clearance to the eccentrics. As explained in the spool video, it is very important that the spool and the diff can have a bit of a wiggle room inside the bulkheads for the whole car to flex evenly. So just make sure this little recess goes at the bottom. I'm gonna secure them with 5mm button head screws. Like so, and check also for free movement. Perfect. Next, we can turn our attention to the upper arms. So we're gonna install the upper bolt studs ST24. For this setup, we're gonna go with 2.5mm shim at the rear. So that's 1 silver, 2 gray shims. And then we can pop in the upper arms, like so. Check for free movement, give them a bit of a wiggle if needed. Perfect. And we can slide in the drive shafts. These were already lubed in the build video, so no need for any extra lube. Just slide it in like so and pop in the upper bolt stud like so. All good. And then we can secure the axles using these P16 clips. They are a bit tight when new, but they do eventually loosen up. To install them, I just grab a small pair of tweezers and slide them in like so. And then we can attach the toe links. So for these, we're gonna use 3.5mm bump steer shims. Grab a pair of ST24. That has 2 black shims. Oops. Again, I like to check that the ball cups are perfectly free with no play. All looking good so far. And repeat the operation at the front. This time we're gonna use 2.75mm upper roll center. That's one black, one gray shim. Grab the front arms. These are the one with the BDL body don't travel limiter screws. Pop them in like so, and again, make sure they can move freely. Perfect. Give them a bit of a wiggle if necessary. This one is just slightly tight. It's perfect, good enough. And to finish it all up, we can install the whole steering assembly. So we're gonna go with 2 5mm flathead screw. So obviously do this after you've installed the servo, but for the example of this build, we're gonna install it without the servo, so I'm gonna have to disassemble it when installing a servo, but for now it's good enough. So we're gonna go finger tight first. Let the whole thing find its place on the chassis. And because the servo mount is very likely to shift in case of a strong impact, I like to go very tight on it. So we're gonna again use the double wrench technique and go savage, fully tight. And then we can attach the steering links. Here we're gonna use 4.5mm bump steer. That's 1 gray, 2 black shims. And we are using the most rearward mounting hole on the Ackerman plate. And here the manual calls for installing 8021s with mounted from the bottom with the button head screws. This will act as a steering limiter. I personally don't like using them, but it is at your own risk, because the travel limiter will then be your steering servo, so you're facing the risk of damaging either a servo, or the secondary role of this steering limiter is to save the drive shaft in case of hard crash from the inside. So this will prevent the inner wheel to go too far in steering lock and therefore actually destroy a front drive shaft. So do it at your own risk. Personally, I've been fine without it. And last step, we can set a rough value for down stop, just to make sure that the suspension down travel is enough for to achieve ride height later in the build during setup. So no need to be very precise here yet, because this droop gonna have to be reset once the proper preload has been set. So we're gonna go close to the desired value, which is 4.4 in the rear. That's good enough. And 5.6 in the front. That's close enough. And this is your final chance to check that you're indeed using the correct droop screws, that they don't protrude from below the chassis. All good here, but that's a reminder that in your kit you will find 4mm and 5mm grub screws to set the droop, so make sure you use the correct ones. But alright, it's starting to look more and more like a car now. Only a few remaining finishing touches left. Hope you guys liked it, and see you in a later video. Ciao, ciao.